After Grandma died, my parents said, "We want the house, the company, everything she left us." My attorney begged me to fight. I said, "Give it all to them." At the final hearing, they smiled until their lawyer read the liability clause. The first slap cut through the string quartet, the champagne glasses, and the low hum of conversation inside Briar Glen Conservatory. My father's palm hit my left cheek hard enough to turn my head. For 1 second, nobody moved. Then Gideon Rowan drew his hand back and slapped me again. The second blow landed louder. A glass stopped halfway to someone's mouth. A woman near the dessert table whispered my name. Across the room, I saw 3 phones lift at almost the same time. My cheek burned beneath the crystal lights. I stood still. That seemed to upset my father more than if I had cried. "You are a penniless disgrace to this family," he said, loud enough for everyone around us to hear. "And you will not ruin your sister's night with your lies." My sister, Avellini, stood beside her fiancé in a silk ivory dress that probably cost more than my first car. She did not step toward me. She did not tell her father to stop. She only looked down at the floor for half a second, then tightened her hand around Von Calder's arm. Von shifted beside her, uncomfortable but quiet. That quiet said more than anything he could have said out loud. My father held his phone in one hand. The screen glowed white against his dark suit. I could see a message thread open there, though not enough to read every word. I did not need to. Rourke Bell's name was at the top. Rourke was my business partner. Or at least, he had been my business partner until that moment. Gideon looked at me with the same expression he used when a contractor missed a deadline or a banker challenged one of his numbers. Flat. Certain. Already finished with the conversation. Rourke told me everything, he said. The client retainers. The hidden accounts. The money you moved without his approval. I watched his thumb press against the edge of the phone. He said you were about to take Rowan Bell Studio down with you. The room seemed smaller after that. The conservatory was full of people who had known my family for years. Some were my father's business contacts. Some were friends of my mother's. Some were people from Vaughn's family, all dressed in polished dark suits and formal dresses, standing beneath white flowers and hanging glass lanterns. They were supposed to be there to celebrate Avellini's engagement. Instead, they were watching my father accuse me of stealing from my own company. I looked at Rourke. He stood near the open bar with one hand around a champagne flute. His face had gone pale beneath the warm lights. He did not meet my eyes. That was when I knew the accusation was not a surprise to him. It was planned. "Dad," I said. My voice came out steady. I was proud of that. "You have one message from Rourke. That is all you have. You have not asked me a single question." His jaw tightened. "I asked enough questions." "No," I said. "You listen to someone who benefits if I am blamed." Avellini exhaled sharply. "Maris, please," she said. "Do not do this here." I turned toward her. My cheek still throbbed, but that was not the part one could not get past. The worst part was not the pain. The worst part was realizing that my father had trusted a man outside our family before giving me one honest chance to speak. "Avellini," I said. He slapped me twice. Her face changed for only a moment. Then she looked toward the guests. "Everyone is upset," she said quietly. "Maybe you should go outside and calm down." I looked at her for a long second. That was when I understood something I should have understood years earlier. In my family, peace only mattered when I was the one expected to pay for it. My father pointed toward the front doors. "Leave," he said. The word landed with more force than the slap. "You are not going to stand here and embarrass your sister after everything this family has done for you." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny. Because I had paid my own way since I was 23. I had worked my way through architecture school. I had built Rowan Bell Studio from a borrowed desk, 2 folding chairs, and more unpaid weekends than I could count. But none of that mattered in that room. Not while my father had decided I was guilty. I bent down and picked up my clutch from the marble floor. One of the metal clasps had snapped open when he hit me. My lipstick rolled out first. Then my keys. Then the small silver card case I carried for client meetings. I gathered everything slowly. No shaking hands. No raised voice. No scene he could use against me later. When I stood again, I looked directly at Rourke. He finally met my eyes. Only for a second. It was long enough. You should have made a better plan, I said. His grip tightened around the champagne glass. Then I walked away. My heels clicked across the pale stone floor while people stepped aside to let me pass. Nobody reached for me. Nobody asked whether I was all right. The doors opened and cold rain hit my face. Outside, the Briar Glen Conservatory looked almost beautiful from the front steps. Light spilled through the tall glass walls. The flowers inside glowed soft gold against the dark February sky. My black coat was still inside near the coat check. I did not go back for it. Rain soaked through my dress within seconds. My left cheek felt hot against the cold air. I walked down 2 steps, stopped beside a stone planter, and pulled out my phone. There was only one person I wanted to call. Dahlia Crane had been my father's lawyer for 18 years. She had handled trust documents, property disputes, partnership agreements, and every family crisis Gideon preferred to solve behind closed doors. She also happened to be the person who had warned me never to sign anything connected to the Rowan Family Legacy Trust without reading every page twice. She answered on the second ring. Maris. Her voice was calm. That made it easier for me to keep mine calm too. Dahlia, I said. Bring every document. There was a pause. Not a confused pause. A serious one. What happened? My father slapped me twice at Avellini's engagement party. I watched rain slide down the screen of my phone. He accused me of stealing from Rowan Bell Studio. He said Rourke told him I moved client retainers into secret accounts. Dahlia was silent for a beat. Then she said, Where are you? Briar Glen Conservatory. I am 45 minutes away. Do not come alone. I was not planning to. I leaned one hand against the wet stone planter. The rain had soaked through my hair. My fingers were cold, but my mind felt clear in a way it had not felt all evening. He has no idea what he just destroyed, I said. Dahlia's voice lowered. Maris, open the studio accounting portal right now. Screenshot every account balance. Every transaction. Every user access log from the last 90 days. I looked through the glass doors. Inside, my father was speaking to Avellini. She had her head tilted toward him, listening while Vaughn stood beside her with his hands in his pockets. Rourke had moved away from the bar. He was heading toward the hallway near the coat check. Do you think he is going to move money? I asked. I think anyone who feeds your father a story like this is preparing for something worse, Dahlia said. Document everything before he gets the chance. The cold rain ran down my neck. I stared at Rourke as he disappeared down the hallway. Then I opened my laptop bag. Because if my father wanted to believe I was a thief, I would let the records tell him who had actually been stealing. For months before my father slapped me at Avellini's engagement party, my biggest problem was a client who could not decide whether she wanted brass cabinet poles or matte black ones. That was the kind of problem I preferred. It had an answer. It had measurements, invoices, samples, timelines, and a final decision that could be made before lunch. People were harder. Especially family. I lived in a 2-bedroom condo in Shaker Heights, 10 minutes from the studio if traffic behaved and 25 if it did not. My building was old brick with narrow hallways, creaky radiators, and a front desk clerk named Curtis who knew every delivery driver in the city. It was not glamorous. It was mine. The mortgage was manageable. The windows faced a row of maples that turned bright red in October. My kitchen was small, but the counter was wide enough for a laptop, a coffee mug, and Brackett's food bowl. Brackett was asleep beneath the kitchen table that morning, stretched across the rug with one paw over his nose. He was a brown and white rescue, mutt with a crooked tail, and the nervous habit of checking every room before he settled down. I had adopted him 3 years earlier from a county shelter outside Akron. The shelter paperwork said he had been found tied to a fence. I never asked for more details. He had enough of a story before he came home with me. By 8:30, I was already at Rowan Bell Studio in Cleveland. Our office occupied the second floor of an old warehouse building near the river. The windows were tall, the floors were worn oak, and the freight elevator made a sound like it was negotiating with death every time someone used it. I loved the place. There were 8 of us then. 2 junior designers, 1 permitting specialist, a project manager, an office coordinator, 2 drafting assistants, Rourke and me. We designed high-end residential additions, historic home renovations, boutique retail interiors, and the occasional small commercial project. We were not one of those giant firms with a glass tower downtown and a lobby full of awards. We were smaller, faster, more careful. At least, that was what I believed then. I handled the work that held everything together. The drawings, the building code research, the contractor questions, the payment schedules, the client retainers, the permits, the budget changes that arrived at 9:45 on a Friday night because someone suddenly decided a staircase needed to move 3 feet. Rourke handled the parts people noticed. He met clients for drinks. He gave confident presentations. He talked about design like it was a lifestyle instead of 1,000 small decisions that had to survive a construction site. He was good at it. I had never resented that. Not until later. That morning, I stood at the long drafting table with a stack of project ledgers open in front of me. The paper smelled faintly of fresh ink. The studio printer hummed in the corner, feeding out a set of plans for a restaurant renovation in Tremont. Brackett lay beneath my desk, scratching one paw softly against the wood floor. Neria Quinn, our project manager, walked over with a clipboard. "The Halden permit package is ready for your signature," she said. "The client also wants to know whether the skylight revision changes the construction start date." "It changes the framing schedule," I said. "Not the start date. Tell them we can hold the original date if the engineer signs off today." Neria nodded. "You already knew that." "I had a feeling." She smiled and walked away. Those small moments mattered to me. People trusted me because I did the work. They knew I would read the contract. They knew I would notice the missing decimal point. They knew I would stay late when something needed to be fixed. At home, that was never the kind of thing people praised. My father praised charm. He praised confidence. He praised the ability to make other people feel important. Avellini had all of that. She could walk into a room and make someone believe they had been waiting all evening to meet her. She remembered birthdays, complimented strangers, and always knew what to say when my father brought clients to dinner. Gideon loved that about her. He called her his natural closer. He said she understood people. When I got accepted into architecture school, he told everyone I was trying something creative. When I earned my license, he called it a good hobby to have. When Rowan Bell Studio got its first major commercial client, he said, "Maybe this phase will stick." He did not say those things cruelly. That almost made them worse. He said them the way some people comment on the weather. Like the meaning was obvious and nobody should take it personally. Avellini never corrected him. She did not need to. She had been trained to believe that being loved and being admired were the same thing. By the time I was 31, I had spent 7 years at a large architecture firm downtown. I learned how to manage impossible clients, delayed permits, arrogant contractors, and senior partners who liked to say they were mentoring women while handing them the work nobody else wanted. Rourke worked there too. He was charming even then. He could convince a client to spend another $50,000 on custom millwork and make them feel grateful for the opportunity. I was the person who made sure the millwork fit through the door. When we left to start Rowan Bell Studio, I thought our skills balanced each other. For a while, they did. He brought in the clients. I made the work real. At lunch, Rourke leaned against the edge of my desk with a coffee in one hand. "You are staying late again tonight, right?" he asked. "I have the Larkin revisions. You have them because you refuse to let anyone else touch them. I have them because the last person who touched them moved a load-bearing wall." He laughed. "Still not over that. I am not interested in repeating it." He looked at the project ledger on my desk. "Sometimes I think you trust paper more than people." I glanced up at him. Paper does not change its story after signing it. For a second, his smile did not reach his eyes. Then his phone buzzed, and he stepped away to answer it. I did not think much about it then. That was the problem. I had built my whole adult life around being prepared for practical problems. I did not understand that some people could watch you build something, smile while you worked, and quietly decide they wanted it for themselves. That evening, I got home after dark. Brackett greeted me at the door with his usual serious expression and a tennis ball clenched between his teeth. I changed into sweatpants, warmed up soup, and opened my laptop at the kitchen counter. My phone rang while I was checking a client email. Avellini. I let it ring twice before answering. Hey, I said. Hey, stranger, she said brightly. Are you still alive under all those blueprints? Barely. She laughed, then paused. Dad wants one night where nobody makes things complicated, Maris. I looked at the calendar beside my laptop. What night? Our engagement party, she said. It is in February. Briar Glen Conservatory. Vaughn's family is coming, and Mom has already made a full guest list. I waited. Avellini knew I was waiting. He really wants the whole family there, she added. The words sounded simple. But I had known my family long enough to hear what lived underneath them. Do not ask questions. Do not bring up old problems. Do not take up too much space. Of course, I said finally. I will be there. After we hung up, Brackett rested his head against my shin. I looked down at him and scratched behind his ears. Then I opened the calendar and typed in the date. February 15th. Briar Glen Conservatory. Avellini's engagement party. At the time, I thought I was adding one more family obligation to an already crowded month. I did not know I was marking the night my father would choose a stranger's lie over his own daughter. A week after Avellini called about her engagement party, my father asked me to meet him downtown. He did not say why over the phone. That was usually a sign that the reason involved money. Come to the office at 3, Gideon said. Dahlia will be there. I paused with my phone between my shoulder and ear while I measured a wall on a renovation site in Cleveland Heights. Dahlia Crane. Yes. What is this about? It is easier to explain in person. Then he ended the call. My father's office sat on the 22nd floor of a glass building near Public Square. Rowan Development Group had occupied that space for almost a decade, ever since Gideon's company had grown past the point where he could run everything from a trailer beside a construction site. The lobby always smelled like polished stone and expensive coffee. The receptionist knew me, but she still looked surprised when I said I was there to see Gideon. Mr. Rowan is expecting you, she said. The elevator opened onto a quiet hallway with framed aerial photos of projects my father had built or acquired. Apartment complexes, retail centers, renovated office buildings. A mixed-use development near the lake that had been in the local business journal 3 times that year. My father liked to say he had built every square foot himself. That was not exactly true, but it was close enough for the version of the story he preferred. His assistant led me into the main conference room. Gideon stood near the windows with his jacket off and his sleeves rolled to his forearms. He had a phone pressed to his ear and a legal pad filled with numbers on the table beside him. Dahlia sat at the far end of the conference table. She wore a charcoal suit and thin gold glasses. In front of her rested a dark burgundy leather folder, thick enough to hold a full lawsuit. My father ended his call when he saw me. Good, he said. You made it. I had a permit meeting until 2, I said. What is going on? He gestured toward the chair across from Dahlia. Sit down. That was when I knew he wanted something. My father did not ask people to sit unless he planned to control the conversation. I took the chair anyway. Dahlia gave me a small nod, but her expression remained neutral. Gideon picked up a folder from the table. Rowan Development is refinancing the Harbor Line project, he said. The lender wants a cleaner capital structure before the next phase starts. I knew Harbor Line. Everyone in Cleveland who followed commercial development knew Harbor Line. It was a large waterfront project with luxury apartments, retail space, and a hotel planned near the river. My father had talked about it for years. You are refinancing a project, I said. Why am I here? His eyes shifted to Dahlia. That was the first thing that made me uneasy. Dahlia opened the burgundy folder and slid a document toward me. The paper was thick and cream-colored. My name was printed near the top. Rowan Family Legacy Trust. Amendment 7. Under that, a section had been marked with a blue tab. I read the first paragraph once. Then I read it again. My mother had been dead for almost 15 years. Most of what I knew about her estate came from my father, which meant I knew only what he chose to tell me. According to Gideon, there had been a small trust meant for Avellini and me. Enough to help with school, maybe a down payment on a home someday. Nothing more. That was what he had always said. Dahlia folded her hands on the table. Your mother's trust was amended after her death through the estate plan she had already executed, she said. The amendment took effect when you turned 35. I looked at the page. My fingers rested against the embossed seal near the bottom. It felt cold and raised beneath my skin. What does this mean? It means you hold 34% of the voting interest tied to the trust's operating assets, Dahlia said. That includes a portion of the assets used in the Harbor Line financing structure. For a few seconds, I did not say anything. I could hear the air system moving above us. I could hear a forklift backing up somewhere far below, its warning beep faint through the glass. 34%. My father had spent my entire life making it sound like I had no claim on anything beyond the room I slept in. Now he was telling me I held a voting share large enough to affect one of his biggest projects. Gideon leaned forward. It is not as dramatic as it sounds, he said. This is paperwork. The bank is asking for beneficiary approval because the trust assets are part of the collateral package. Collateral for what? The refinancing. What exactly is being refinanced? His face changed slightly. Not anger. Annoyance. The Harbor Line debt. Construction costs. Existing obligations. Standard development issues. Then I want the debt schedule, I said. I want the valuation reports, the lender terms, and every document showing how the trust is being used. His gaze settled on me. You do not need to turn this into a legal interrogation. I am not turning it into anything, I said. You asked for my signature. Dahlia looked down at the papers, but I caught the smallest shift in her expression. Approval. Gideon tapped one finger against the table. This refinancing protects the family assets. It gives the project room to finish. It keeps people employed. And what does it require from me? A consent form. Without the documents? He exhaled through his nose. Maris. That tone was familiar. It was the tone he used when I was 16 and asked why Avellini had a new car while I was expected to take the bus. It was the tone he used when I questioned a family decision after everyone else had already agreed. You are making this difficult. You are missing the larger point. You should be grateful to be included at all. I kept my hands flat on the table. I will read everything first. He stared at me for a long moment. Then he sat down across from me. For the first time in my life, my father did not look at me like I was a daughter who had wandered into adult business. He looked at me like I was a signature he needed. You will do the right thing for the family, he said. The sentence sounded calm. It was not a request. It was pressure wrapped in familiar words. Dahlia closed the folder and turned toward me. Maris, she said, your father may be the managing trustee, but he is not the only person whose signature matters anymore. Gideon's eyes moved toward her. The room went quiet. Dahlia continued before he could interrupt. You should not sign anything until you review the conduct clause, the fiduciary review provisions, and the full refinancing package. Dahlia, Gideon said sharply. She did not look at him. She has a right to understand what she is being asked to certify. I looked down at the documents again. The words on the page had changed the shape of the room. There were sections about beneficiary consent, trustee conduct, asset protections, independent review rights, things nobody had ever told me I possessed. My father reached for the folder, but I placed my hand over it first. I am taking copies, I said. His jaw tightened. You can read them at home. I plan to. Dahlia slid a second set of documents toward me. They are yours. I gathered the papers carefully. The leather folder felt heavier than it had when I walked in. When I stood, Gideon remained seated. Do not let this become personal, he said. I looked at him. It became personal when you spent 15 years telling me I had no place in any of this. He did not answer. I left the conference room with the trust documents under my arm and the sound of my father's silence behind me. That evening, I took the folder to his house in Pepper Pike because Nadine had invited me for dinner weeks earlier. The dining room smelled like rosemary chicken and polished wood. Avellini was there too, scrolling through wedding venues on her phone while Nadine arranged place settings. She looked up when she saw the folder. "What is that?" she asked. "Paperwork Dad wants me to sign." Avellini's smile held for half a second. Then it disappeared. "Oh," she said softly. "That?" I looked at her. "What does that mean?" Nadine set down a glass too carefully. "It means your father is handling a lot right now," she said. "You should try not to make things harder for him." I placed the burgundy folder on the sideboard. The embossed trust seal caught the warm light from the chandelier. For the first time, I wondered how much of my family's life had been built on documents I had never been allowed to see, and why my sister looked frightened that I finally had. By the following Saturday, I had learned that my sister's engagement was apparently becoming a regional infrastructure project. Avellini texted me at 9 in the morning. "Meet me at Lorne and Company at 11. Dad is covering the final ring setting." I stared at the message while Brackett waited beside the front door with his leash in his mouth. I had no interest in spending my weekend inside a jewelry store, but I went anyway. Partly because Avellini had asked. Mostly because I wanted to understand why she had looked frightened when she saw the trust folder at dinner. Lorne and Company sat inside a polished shopping district outside Beechwood, with tall black windows and a doorman who wore gloves even in mild weather. The sales floor smelled like velvet, glass cleaner, and something floral that lingered too long in the air. Avellini was already there. She stood at a mirrored counter in a fitted cream coat, one hand held under the lights while a jeweler adjusted the band around her finger. The ring was large enough to catch attention from across the room. Vaughn stood beside her with his jacket draped over one arm. He smiled when he saw me, but it looked careful. "Maris," Avellini said brightly. "Come look." I stepped closer. The diamond sat in a thin platinum setting with smaller stones around the band. It was beautiful in the way expensive things often are. Perfectly cut. Perfectly lit. Perfectly designed to make people stop and stare. "It is gorgeous," I said. Avellini lifted her hand again. "Dad said it should look like it belongs in the family." I glanced toward Gideon. He stood a few feet away, speaking quietly with the jeweler. His suit was immaculate, but there were shadows under his eyes that had not been there a month earlier. He kept checking his phone between sentences. Every few minutes, his expression tightened. Then he put the phone away and smiled again. It was a small thing, but I noticed it. I had spent my career watching clients pretend that a project was on budget while their invoices said otherwise. Stress had a rhythm. It showed up in the way people reread numbers, in the way they spoke too fast, in the way they kept trying to control a room that had already slipped beyond them. My father was doing all three. Avellini caught me looking at him. "He has a lot going on," she said quickly. "Harborline is in a sensitive phase." "I know," I said. "He asked for my signature." Her smile faded. Vaughn shifted beside her. The jeweler pretended not to hear us, though his hands slowed over the display tray. Avellini lowered her voice. "Maris, you do not need to make everything difficult. I asked for documents. You asked for a full forensic map of Dad's business before signing one consent form. I asked for debt schedules and collateral documents. You know what I mean." I did. She meant I had asked questions in a family where questions were considered disloyal when they threatened the wrong person. Gideon returned to the counter and slipped a black card toward the jeweler. "Is everything settled?" he asked. "It will be once we finalize the insurance paperwork," the jeweler said. My father nodded, but his fingers tapped once against the glass. Avellini leaned into Vaughn's shoulder. "We are also looking at the final menu this afternoon," she said. "You should come. Briar Glen is doing a tasting for us." "I have a site visit," I said. "Dad wants you there." That sentence had become more common lately. Not because Gideon suddenly wanted family time. Because he wanted my signature. I met them at Briar Glen that evening. The conservatory looked different without guests. No string quartet. No champagne towers. No phones held high in judgment. Just white tablecloths, tall windows, and staff carrying covered plates through the empty room. Nadine was seated at the center table with a printed menu in front of her. She wore a dark green dress and a perfume so sweet it made the air feel heavy. Beside her sat a stack of glossy invoices. I saw the Briar Glen Conservatory deposit before she could cover it with her hand. The total was printed near the bottom. $48,000. Below it was a second invoice from Lorne and Company for the ring setting and insurance package. I did not need to read every number. The shape of the spending was enough. Gideon arrived 10 minutes late. He apologized to Vaughn's mother, who had joined us for the tasting, then sat down and picked up the wine list as if he had not spent the day moving from one financial conversation to another. "This is an important night for our family," he said. "Vaughn brings us into a better circle." Vaughn's mother smiled politely. Vaughn himself looked down at the menu. Evelini glowed at the compliment. She always did when Gideon spoke about her, like she was an achievement he could display. I watched my father lift his wine glass. His hand was steady. His eyes were not. The server placed the first course in front of us. A delicate plate of roasted pear, goat cheese, and candied walnuts. Someone commented on the presentation. Someone else asked whether the salmon would be served with saffron cream. The conversation moved around me. Then Nadine leaned closer. "You should stop asking questions about the company," she said. I looked at her. "What?" "Your father is under pressure. You are not helping. He asked for my approval. And you have made that approval into a problem." I asked to see the documents. Nadine's smile stayed in place. "Financial matters are not your strength, Maris." For a moment, I almost responded the way I would have when I was younger. I almost explained that I managed project budgets every day, that I read contracts for a living, that I knew how quickly a bad debt structure could swallow a business. But I had spent too many years trying to prove basic competence to people committed to misunderstanding me. So I only said, "That is not your decision." Evelini set down her fork. "Maybe if you signed, everything would be easier for everyone." The table went still. Her tone was gentle. That made it worse. I looked at her carefully. "Easier how?" She blinked. "You know Dad is trying to protect the family." "From what?" "From uncertainty," she said. "From people panicking over things they do not understand." I glanced toward the invoices beside Nadine's chair. The glossy paper reflected the candlelight. Briar Glen. Jewelry. Floral deposits. Catering. A private room for guests from Vaughn's side. My sister did not have to tell me where some of the money was going. The way she avoided my eyes told me enough. "I will not sign anything without an independent report," I said. Evelini's expression changed. The softness disappeared first, then the warmth. "You always do this," she said. "Every happy family moment becomes a courtroom with you." I sat back in my chair. Across the table, Gideon looked at me with open irritation. The sound of wine glasses touching carried through the conservatory. Somewhere near the kitchen, a server laughed too loudly. I looked at my sister's ring, then at the stack of invoices, then at my father's phone vibrating face down beside his plate. For the first time, I understood that the pressure to sign was not only about Harbor Line. It might be about Evelini's perfect future too. And if I was right, my father had already spent money he could not afford to lose. The week after the menu tasting, I started noticing small things at Rowan Bell Studio. Nothing dramatic at first. A payment approval that showed up 12 hours late. A client retainer report that had been exported twice. A vendor invoice marked reviewed, even though I had not reviewed it. Each problem had an explanation. That was what made them dangerous. By Monday morning, the office was loud with the usual rhythm of deadlines. The printer ran almost nonstop. Someone had burned toast in the kitchenette. Brackett lay beneath my desk with his chin on his paws, pretending he was asleep while tracking every person who walked past. Rourke came in carrying 2 coffees. He set one beside my laptop. "Peace offering," he said. "For what?" He smiled. "You have been glaring at the payment dashboard since 8:30. I have been reading it. That is not the same thing. Not when you keep asking for access changes. His smile stayed in place, but it changed around the edges. Rourke pulled a chair beside my desk and leaned back. I asked because we are growing, he said. We have more projects, more retainers, more moving parts. It would help if I could see the full approval schedule without waiting for you to forward every report. You already see the project schedules. I mean the accounting side. I looked at him. The accounting side is not a client presentation. He folded his hands around the coffee cup. I know that. I am not trying to take anything from you. That is not what I said. Then what are you saying? I opened the payment dashboard and turned the screen slightly toward him. I am saying you asked for the accounting software password last Thursday. Then you asked whether the retainer accounts required 2 approvals. Then you asked how quickly a payment can be released once both approvals are entered. Rourke stared at the screen. I asked because I am a co-owner. You asked 3 questions about controls in 1 week. You have never cared about controls before. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The studio printer kept running behind us. Someone laughed near the front desk. Brackets shifted under the table and scratched once against the floor. Rourke finally shrugged. I am trying to understand more of the business. Then we can schedule a finance review. Sure, he said. That works. His voice sounded easy. Too easy. Later that afternoon, I found 2 reimbursement forms sitting in the digital queue. Both had been submitted after the deadline. Both listed vague project expenses. Neither included a receipt. I forwarded them to Rourke. Can you explain these? He replied less than a minute later. System issue. I uploaded the receipts twice and then deleted the wrong files. I will fix it. I read the message 3 times. It was not proof of anything. It was just another answer that arrived too quickly. By 5:30, most of the team had gone home. The office settled into its after-hours silence. The dry heat from the vents made the room feel stale, and the coffee on my desk had gone cold enough to smell bitter. Neria appeared in my doorway with her coat over one arm. You have a minute? Always. She shut the door behind her. That alone made me sit up straighter. Neria was not dramatic. She handled vendors, clients, staff conflicts, scheduling problems, and last-minute permit changes without raising her voice. She did not bring rumors into my office. So when she sat down, I knew she had thought about it first. I do not want to overstep, she said. You are not. She glanced toward the glass wall that separated my office from the main studio. Rourke has been taking calls from his car. I waited. He has done it 3 times this week. He leaves after lunch, sits in the parking lot for 20 or 30 minutes, then comes back in like nothing happened. Did you hear anything? Not enough to tell you exactly what it was about. She paused. But yesterday I heard him say something about timing. He said, she will not know until it is already in motion. The cold coffee smell seemed stronger after that. Are you sure? I am sure enough to tell you. I looked at the project ledgers stacked beside my laptop. Their edges were clean and white under the office lights. What else? Neria hesitated. He has been asking the office coordinator about who has access to the payment portal. He also asked whether you work from home on Fridays. My fingers tightened around the side of my chair. Thank you, I said. I hope I am wrong. So do I. After Neria left, I closed my office door and opened the payment portal. The blue light from the screen washed across my hands. I checked the user settings first. There were 5 names listed under financial access. Mine, Rourke's, Neria's limited project account, our bookkeeper. Then one more, RB Consulting Access. I stared at the name. It had been added 10 days earlier. The account had view access to 2 client retainer ledgers and limited export permissions. Not enough to release money on its own, but enough to see balances, timing, client names, and approval patterns. Enough to prepare. I clicked through the user history. The account had been created from an administrative login. Rourke's login. My stomach tightened, but I kept reading. There was no company profile attached to the user. No bookkeeping agreement. No email record in the vendor folder. No invoice. No note in the quarterly finance review. Just a name. RB Consulting Access. I printed the user log. Then I printed the last 90 days of retainer activity. The printer made a steady mechanical sound while page after page slid into the tray. I placed them in a folder, then saved duplicate PDFs to a private drive I used for client backups. The process took less than 20 minutes. It felt much longer. The thing making me uneasy was not the wrong number. It was the feeling that someone had rehearsed an answer for every question I had not asked yet. Rourke came back toward my office around 6:30. He had his coat on and his car keys in one hand. "You're still here?" he asked. I needed to finish something. His eyes dropped to the stack of papers on my desk. Only for a second. But I saw it. "What are those?" he asked. "Retainer reports." "You're checking everything now?" "I check everything." He smiled, but this time I could see the strain behind it. "Good habit." "Usually." He stood in my doorway for another moment. Then he nodded and walked away. I waited until I heard the elevator doors close. After that, I picked up my phone. Dahlia's number was open on my screen. I almost called her. I almost told her about the extra user account, the late forms, the questions about access, and the strange calls from Rourke's car. Then my inbox chimed. A client had sent revised plans for the Larkin project, marked urgent. The engineer needed my comments by morning. I looked at Dahlia's name again. Then I set the phone down. "I will call tomorrow," I told myself. Brackett lifted his head from under the desk. Outside the windows, the city had gone dark. And somewhere below, in the parking lot, Rourke Bell was probably making another call I had not yet learned how to hear. The rain started before I left Shaker Heights. By the time I reached Briar Glen Conservatory, it had turned into a hard, cold sheet against the windshield, the kind that made the parking lot shine black beneath the lamps and pushed water in thin streams along the curb. I sat in my car for a moment with both hands on the wheel. Inside, the conservatory glowed through the glass walls. White flowers climbed the columns. Candlelight flickered across the tables. A string quartet played near the far end of the room, though the sound was softened by the rain and the thick glass between us. Everything looked expensive. Everything looked planned. That was the problem. Nadine and Avellini had planned every inch of the night. The flowers had been selected after 3 separate consultations. The menu had been tested. The guest list had been revised twice. The place cards had been printed on handmade paper with gold edges. There was no room in that kind of event for an unexpected truth. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror, smoothed the front of my black dress, and picked up my clutch. Then I stepped into the rain. The valet ran over with an umbrella, but the wind drove water sideways anyway. By the time I reached the entrance, the shoulders of my coat were damp and my hair had started to curl at the edges. Avellini was waiting just inside the doors. She wore an ivory silk dress with a narrow belt at the waist and a smile that looked practiced enough to survive photographs, relatives, and bad news. "You made it," she said, kissing the air beside my cheek. I said I would. She looked at the rain behind me. "Mom was worried you would cancel." "Why would I cancel?" Her smile shifted, almost too quickly to notice. "I do not know. You have been busy." That was not an answer. Before I could ask another question, Vaughn appeared beside her. He had a glass of champagne in one hand and a dark blue tie that matched the flowers arranged near the bar. "Maris," he said. "You look great. Congratulations." He smiled, but his eyes moved toward Avellini before coming back to me. That was another small thing. Small things were starting to collect. Avellini hooked her arm through Vaughn's. "Go get a drink," she said. "Dad wants to talk to you when he gets a minute." The words landed quietly. Still, I heard the shape of them. "Dad wants to talk to you." Not "Dad is happy you are here." Not "Dad wants to say hello." I looked past her into the room. Gideon stood near the center of the conservatory with Nadine and 2 men from Vaughn's family. He wore a charcoal suit and held his phone low against his thigh. His face was composed, but his hand closed around the phone more tightly than it needed to. A moment later, he looked up and saw me. He did not smile. I walked toward the bar. The string quartet shifted into another song, and the heaters near the windows pushed warm air through the room, making the rain against the glass look even colder. Rourke was standing near the cocktail tables. He had a drink in his hand, though he had barely touched it. His tie was loosened at the collar, and his eyes moved across the room in short, restless cuts. When he saw me, he smiled. "Maris, you look good. You too." The pause between us lasted longer than it should have. I looked at his glass. "You are drinking champagne now?" It was handed to me. "By who?" He gave a small laugh. "You always ask for a source. I like complete information." His smile tightened. For a second, I remembered him standing in my office doorway 2 weeks earlier, looking at the printed retainer reports on my desk. I remembered the extra user account. RB Consulting Access. I remembered Neria's voice. Rourke has been acting like someone who already knows how the ending is supposed to go. He leaned closer. "We need to talk about the studio next week." The sentence was casual. The delivery was not. "About what?" "Some things have been coming up." "What things?" He glanced toward Gideon. That was enough. "We can discuss it Monday," he said. "No," I said. "You brought it up now." "What things?" Rourke took a sip of champagne, then set the glass down on a passing tray. "I do not want to do this at your sister's engagement party." "Then why are you here?" His jaw moved once. "I was invited." "So was I." He looked past me again, toward the center of the room. "I am trying to keep this from getting worse." The rain hit the glass in a sudden burst. I watched a server adjust a row of champagne flutes. I watched one of Vaughn's cousins laugh too loudly near the dance floor. I watched Avellini leaning into her mother for a photograph. Then I looked back at Rourke. "You have already decided what this is," I said. His expression changed. Only slightly. But I saw it. Before he could answer, my father's voice came from behind me. "Maris, walk with me." He did not wait for me to agree. He turned toward the hallway near the coat check, and I followed because there were too many people watching not to. The hallway was quieter. The quartet faded behind the walls. Rain struck the narrow windows in uneven lines. The air smelled faintly of wet coats and expensive perfume. Gideon stopped beside a table holding framed photos of Avellini and Vaughn. He kept one hand in his pocket. The other held his phone. "I have heard some troubling things about the studio," he said. I looked at him. "What things?" His eyes moved to the phone. Then back to me. "Rourke says there are financial irregularities." The phrase sounded rehearsed. Not emotional. Not personal. A phrase someone had chosen because it would travel well if repeated. "What irregularities?" I asked. "He says client retainers have been moved without proper disclosure." "That is not true." "He says there are accounts he cannot access. He has the access he needs for project operations. He says you have been making decisions without him." I folded my hands in front of me. "Dad, if Rourke has a concern, he can bring it to me, to Neria, or to an outside accountant. He does not bring it to you at my sister's party." Gideon's eyes hardened. "For once, Maris, do not make your sister's happiness about yourself." I looked at him. The framed photo beside us showed Avellini laughing with her head tilted back, Vaughn's hand around her waist, both of them standing under the same white flowers that filled the conservatory now. "You pulled me away from the party," I said. "You brought up accusations about my company. How exactly am I making this about myself?" His face tightened. "You always have a story." The voice came from behind him. Avellini had followed us into the hallway. She stood with her arms crossed, her expression careful enough for guests, but not for me. "Every time there is a problem," she said, "you have some explanation that makes you the reasonable one and everyone else the villain." I looked from her to Gideon. Then I looked at the phone in his hand. The screen lit briefly. A message notification appeared and vanished before I could read it. But I saw enough. Rourke's name. And beneath it, the edge of a group thread. Gideon. Avellini. Rourke. My father noticed where I was looking and turned the phone face down in his palm. That movement told me more than anything he could have said. They had discussed this before I arrived. Maybe for hours. Maybe for days. They had listened to Rourke's version of the story. They had built a conclusion. They had decided that my sister's engagement party needed protecting from me. Not from the person who had created the accusation. From me. In my family, an accusation was always more believable than evidence if it kept Avellini's night perfect. I kept my voice even. If you want to discuss the studio, I will do it with records in front of us. Avellini's mouth tightened. There you go again. What does that mean? It means you turn everything into documents and reports because you cannot handle being wrong. I almost answered. Instead, I adjusted the clasp on my clutch. The metal was cold beneath my thumb. It was a small movement. A normal movement. It gave me 1 second to choose my words. I can handle being wrong, I said. I just do not accept being accused without proof. Gideon stepped closer. His hand tightened around the phone in his pocket. Behind us, the quartet played on. Guests laughed. Glasses touched. The whole room continued moving as if nothing had changed. But something had. I had walked into Briar Glen expecting an uncomfortable family event. Instead, I had walked into a decision already made. And my father had not brought me there to hear the truth. He had brought me there to stay quiet while everyone else repeated a lie. For a few seconds, nobody said anything. The hallway felt narrower than before. Rain streaked down the tall windows beside us. The string quartet continued somewhere beyond the wall, soft and polished, as if the room had not changed at all. Then Gideon turned and walked back toward the main conservatory. Avellini, he said. Come with me. My sister followed him without looking at me. I stood there for one more breath, my clutch still in my hand, before I followed them into the room. The second I stepped out from the hallway, I knew he had decided to make it public. Gideon stopped near the center of the conservatory, directly beneath the hanging lanterns. Guests were gathered around the cocktail tables. Vaughn's parents stood near the flower wall. Rourke was still beside the bar, but his champagne glass had disappeared. My father raised his voice just enough. Since we are all here, he said, there is something that needs to be addressed. The room did not go silent all at once. It happened in pieces. A conversation ended near the dessert table. A woman set down her glass. Vaughn's mother looked from Gideon to me with the cautious attention people use when they sense they are about to witness something private. I stood 3 steps away from my father. He did not look at me when he began. Maris has created serious financial problems at Rowanville Studio, he said. Problems that could affect clients, employees, and people who trusted her. My hands remained at my sides. The room seemed to sharpen around me. Avellini stood close to Vaughn, her face pale beneath the warm lights. Nadine had moved toward the center of the room too, one hand pressed lightly against her necklace. Rourke took 1 step forward. He looked uncomfortable. He had practiced that expression well. I did not want this to come out tonight, he said. But there are accounts I cannot access. Retainers that have been moved without proper approval. I have tried to address it privately. I looked at him. You have tried to address it privately? Rourke swallowed. Maris, please do not make this harder. Harder for who? His eyes flicked toward Gideon. That was all I needed. I took 1 slow breath. The cold metal clasp of my clutch pressed against my palm. Rourke, I said, would you repeat that statement in front of a forensic accountant? The words moved through the room like a draft. His face changed. Only slightly. But I saw the hesitation before he covered it. I do not know why you are trying to intimidate me. I am not intimidating you, I said. I am asking whether you would repeat your allegation under audit. Avellini stepped forward before he could answer. She is doing it again, she said. She is trying to scare everyone because she knows she has been caught. I turned toward her. You have not seen 1 document. I have seen enough, she said. No, I said quietly. You have heard enough. Her mouth tightened. My father moved closer. You have taken enough from this family, Gideon said. You have taken support, time, patience, and now you expect us to stand here while you put your sister's engagement party at risk. The accusation was so absurd that I almost looked around to see whether anyone else understood it. I had paid my own mortgage. I had built my own business. I had spent years being treated like the difficult daughter because I asked questions before signing things. Still, I said nothing. I only looked at him. Dad, I said, you are believing a lie because it is easier than admitting Rourke has been setting something up. His face hardened. You do not get to call everyone else liars because you have been cornered. I am not calling everyone else a liar. My voice stayed even. I am saying he is lying. Rourke looked down. That movement was small. My father saw it too. For 1 second, I thought Gideon might stop. I thought he might ask a question. I thought he might finally notice the way Rourke had avoided every direct answer. Instead, Gideon lifted his hand. The first slap landed across my left cheek. The sound cut through the music. It cut through the glasses. It cut through the room so cleanly that every face turned toward us. I felt the heat before I felt the pain. My head moved to the side, and one loose strand of hair fell across my mouth. I did not touch my face. I did not step back. I looked at my father. That seemed to make him angrier. "You are a penniless disgrace to this family," he said. "And you will not ruin your sister's night with your lies." Avellini stared at the floor. Nadine's lips parted, but no sound came out. Vaughn shifted beside Avellini. His jaw tightened as though he wanted to say something and had already decided not to. My father's hand rose again. The second slap landed harder. My clutch fell onto the marble floor. The clasp snapped open. My keys slid one way. My card case slid another. My lipstick rolled beneath a nearby cocktail table. Nobody moved to help me. That was the part one remembered later. Not the impact. Not the pain. I remembered the people who watched my things scatter across the floor and did nothing. Vaughn spoke first. "Maybe everyone needs to calm down," he said. His voice was low. Careful. Like this was a disagreement over seating arrangements instead of a father striking his daughter in front of 60 guests. I bent down and picked up my keys. Then my card case. Then my lipstick. My cheek burned under the lights, but my hands did not shake. I placed everything back inside my clutch and closed the broken clasp as best I could. When I stood, I looked at Rourke. "You should have made a better plan," I said. His face went pale. Then I looked at my father. "I am leaving," I said. "Not because you told me to. Because I need to remember exactly who stood here and said nothing." Gideon pointed toward the doors. "Go." So I did. I walked past the flower wall, past the champagne tower, past the place cards with Avellini and Vaughn's names printed in gold. The doors opened, and cold rain hit my face before I reached the front steps. My coat was still inside. I did not go back for it. The wind pushed rain through my hair and down the back of my dress. My phone felt cold in my hand when I pulled it from my clutch. I called Dahlia Crane. She answered on the second ring. "Maris, bring every document," I said. Her voice changed immediately. "What happened?" My father slapped me twice. He accused me of stealing from Rowan Bell's studio in front of everyone at Avellini's engagement party. There was a pause. Not a shocked pause. A focused one. "Where are you?" "Briar Glen Conservatory." "I am 45 minutes away. I need you to listen carefully." I pressed one hand against the wet stone railing beside the steps. "Tell me." "Open the studio accounting portal. Screenshot every transaction from the last 90 days. Capture every user access log, every retainer account, every pending transfer, and every approval history." I looked through the glass doors. Inside, my father was still speaking to guests. Avellini stood beside Vaughn, smiling weakly for someone who had probably asked what happened. Rourke had disappeared from the center of the room. "Bring the trust documents," I said. "The loan covenants. The refinancing package. The email records from Rowan Development." "I already have copies," Dahlia said. "Do not engage with anyone. Document everything before Rourke gets the chance to move again." The rain slid down the screen of my phone. My cheek burned like it had been pressed against a heater. For years, I had kept quiet because silence was easier than becoming the problem. That night, I was quiet for another reason. I wanted to remember every face. Every hand that stayed still. Every person who chose comfort over truth. Then I opened my laptop bag. Because Rourke Bell had made one mistake. He thought he had only framed a woman who would leave crying. He had not realized he had given me time to collect the evidence. I went back inside through the side entrance near the coat check. Nobody stopped me. Most of the guests were still gathered in the main conservatory, pulled toward the center of the room by the kind of public discomfort people pretend not to watch. The string quartet had started playing again, But the music sounded thinner now, almost swallowed by the heaters and the rain against the glass. I found a small sitting area just beyond the coat check. There were 4 upholstered chairs, a low glass table, and a bowl of pale orchids nobody had touched all night. A half-full glass of water sat on the table, ice melting into slow clear drops. I placed my clutch beside it. Then I opened my laptop. My hands were steady. That surprised me at first. My cheeks still burned. My hair was damp from the rain. The skin beneath my left eye felt tight where my father's palm had landed. But the moment I opened the accounting portal, everything narrowed into categories I understood. Balances. Access logs. Authorization history. Pending transfers. I signed in using my administrator credentials and pulled up the primary dashboard for Rowan Bell Studio. The loading bar crawled across the screen in pale blue. I watched it move. Slowly. One section at a time. Dahlia stayed on the phone. "Start with the account overview," she said. "I want screenshots of every balance and every active user. Then move to the retainer ledgers. Do not skip anything because it looks ordinary. I know. I know you know. I am saying it because tonight is not the night to assume anything." That was fair. I opened the first ledger and took a screenshot. Then the second. Then the third. I captured the client names, the retainer balances, the payment schedules, and the authorization trail attached to each account. I saved every image in a folder marked with the date and time. By the 10th screenshot, the room had gone quiet around me. By the 20th, I could hear the soft click of my keyboard louder than the music outside. By the 31st, I had stopped noticing the heat in my cheek. At 42, I found the first irregularity. 2 retainer accounts had been modified 3 weeks earlier. They had always required dual authorization before any funds could be released. 1 approval from me, 1 from Rourke. That was how we had set it up when we opened the company account. It was not complicated, but it made unilateral transfers harder. Now the approval structure showed an additional user. I clicked into the account settings. The screen refreshed. Then the name appeared. Belridge Operations. I stared at it for several seconds. The account had been given visibility into 2 retainer ledgers, export rights for transaction reports, and approval routing access that allowed it to receive confirmation notices before I did. It was not a full administrator account. It did not need to be. It was positioned exactly where someone would place an account if they wanted to watch the timing, identify the balances, and prepare for a transfer without setting off an immediate alert. "Dahlia," I said. "I am here. There is another user in the system. Belridge Operations." The line went still. "Spell it." I did. She repeated the name back to me. "Do you know who it is?" "No, can you see who created it?" I clicked through the user history. The access log opened with timestamps, device locations, and administrative actions. The account had been created from an administrator login at 8:17 p.m. on a Thursday. Rourke's login. I took another screenshot. Then another. The blue bar refreshed again. I pulled up the second retainer account. The same account appeared there too. Belridge Operations. Same access level. Same timing. Same approval routing position. I counted the screenshots already saved. 46. I kept going. At 47, I captured the user creation record. At 48, I captured the modified dual approval settings. At 49, I opened the authorization history. At 50, I found the pending transfer. The amount sat in the middle of the page under a gray status line. Pending release. $68,400. The scheduled completion time was Monday at 8 a.m. The destination account was listed only as a business entity. Belridge Operations, LLC. I did not move for a moment. Then I took the 51st screenshot. The rain pressed harder against the narrow window beside the sitting area. Water tracked down the glass in silver lines. Somewhere in the main room, someone laughed, then stopped abruptly. Dahlia's voice came through the phone. "Maris, send those files to me now. All of them. Do not send them through the company server. I am using my private backup drive." "Good. Email me a secure link and copy the folder to an encrypted device if you have one." "I do." "Do it." I attached the files one by one. The folder took longer to upload than I wanted. Each image moved across the screen in slow increments while the blue progress line advanced, paused, then advanced again. I watched it with my jaw clenched. Rourke had not just been asking questions about access. He had been building a route. He had created a shell company. He had changed the configuration on accounts that were supposed to require both of us. He had placed his company inside the approval chain, close enough to see the money and close enough to move it. Then he had gone to my father. He had handed Gideon a story about secret accounts and stolen retainers. A story designed to make me look guilty before the transfer even cleared. Rourke was not only planning to take the money. He was planning to use my name like a box to bury everything inside. My phone vibrated. Neria was calling. I answered immediately. "Are you still at Briar Glen?" she asked. "Yes." Her voice was low. I checked the vendor folder from home. There is no contract with Belridge Operations. No bookkeeping agreement. No invoice. Nothing. Have you ever heard Rourke mention them? Never. I looked at the pending transfer again. "It is an LLC," I said. "The transfer is scheduled for Monday morning." Neria inhaled sharply. "Can you stop it?" "Not alone." Dahlia came back onto the line. "I have called a forensic accountant," she said. "His name is Dr. Marius Holt. He can preserve the transaction trail and issue an emergency review summary tonight." "Tonight?" "Yes. He is coming with me." "What about the bank?" "I called the trust's relationship manager. She is reviewing the account flags now." I looked through the open doorway toward the main conservatory. I could see the edge of my father's shoulder among the guests. He was talking to someone with his back turned toward me. Avellini stood beside Vaughn near the flower wall, smiling for another photograph. They still thought the night was under control. They still thought I had gone outside to cry. Dahlia's voice changed. "He did not create the lie because he was angry with you," she said. "He created it because he needed someone else standing where he planned to leave the damage." I closed the accounting portal only after I had saved every page. Then I put the laptop back in my bag. The glass of water on the table had gone warm. The ice had melted completely. I stood up. My cheek still hurt. But the pain had become something useful. A timestamp. A record. A reminder of the exact moment I stopped trying to convince people who had already chosen not to believe me. And somewhere in that crowded conservatory, Rourke Bell was still waiting for Monday morning. He had no idea that his transfer would never make it that far. 43 minutes after I called Dahlia, the music stopped. It did not end naturally. The quartet reached the middle of a song, then one violin fell quiet, followed by the cello, then the rest. A few guests turned toward the front entrance before I did. Dahlia Crane had arrived. She walked through the glass doors in a black coat, still wet from the rain, carrying the dark burgundy trust folder against her side. Beside her was Marius Holt, the relationship manager assigned to the Rowan Family Legacy Trust. He was in his late 50s, compact and careful, with a gray wool overcoat and a document case in one hand. They looked completely out of place among the flowers, champagne, and gold place cards. That was probably why everyone noticed them. Gideon moved first. He crossed the room with quick, controlled steps, his expression already arranged into the kind of calm he used when he wanted people to think he still had the upper hand. "This is a private engagement party," he said. "Whatever this is can wait until Monday." Dahlia stopped near the center of the conservatory. "No," she said. "It cannot." Her voice was not loud. It did not need to be. The room had already gone quiet enough for people near the bar to hear every word. Gideon glanced at Marius. "What is he doing here?" Marius did not answer immediately. He opened his document case, removed a thin packet, and held it at his side. Dahlia looked directly at my father. "I am here because there is an active financial irregularity connected to Rowan Bell Studio, a pending transfer involving a shell entity and a trust beneficiary who was physically assaulted less than an hour ago." Nadine's hand rose to her throat. Avellini looked toward Vaughn. Rourke did not move. I stepped out from the sitting area then. The room made space for me without anyone saying a word. My hair was still damp. My coat was still inside near the coat check. The red mark on my cheek had not faded, and I could see people noticing it before they looked away. I walked beside Dahlia. Not behind her. Not because I needed to prove anything. Because I was done being moved out of the frame whenever my family wanted a cleaner picture. Gideon stared at me. You called Dahlia? I called the person who handles the trust documents you asked me to sign, I said. His jaw shifted. You brought lawyers to your sister's engagement party. Dahlia turned toward him. Mr. Rowan, your daughter did not bring a problem into this room. She responded to one that was already here. Marius placed his document packet on a nearby cocktail table. The glass surface reflected the silver seal on the first page. He opened it carefully. The sound of paper moving was dry and sharp in the quiet room. Earlier tonight, we received a notice from Ms. Rowan's counsel regarding a pending transfer of $68,400 from a client retainer account, he said. The transfer is scheduled for Monday morning and is directed to Bellridge Operations, LLC. Rourke's face lost color. He stepped forward. That is a technical matter, he said. There is no reason to turn this into a public accusation. Marius looked at him. Your administrator credentials created the Bellridge Operations access profile. Rourke's mouth opened, then closed. The system logs can be wrong. They can, Marius said. That is why we cross-reference the login history, device authorization, approval routing changes, and the account configuration timestamps. He placed another page on the table. The access profile was created 3 weeks ago from your assigned administrative account. 2 dual authorization retainer accounts were also modified during that period. The room seemed to tighten around us. I looked at Rourke. He had spent weeks acting concerned about controls. He had asked about passwords. He had asked about approval windows. He had spoken to my father as if he was worried about the business we built together. Now he stood in front of 60 people with nowhere to hide except a technical explanation that did not exist. This is a misunderstanding, he said. I was trying to bring in bookkeeping support. Where's the engagement letter? Dahlia asked. Rourke looked at her. Excuse me. The contract with Bellridge Operations. The disclosure. The vendor invoice. The resolution authorizing a third-party user to access client retainers. The written consent from your co-owner. He said nothing. Dahlia nodded once. That is what I expected. Avellini spoke before anyone else could. Maris has been trying to make him look guilty all night, she said. Maybe everyone should wait until there is an actual investigation. I turned toward her. There is an investigation. Marius slid the anomaly report across the table. The heading was visible under the chandelier light. Preliminary account activity review. An emergency review is already underway, he said. The account has been flagged. The pending transfer is being held pending further authorization. Vaughn's hand moved to Avellini's elbow. Not protectively. More like he was trying to guide her away from the center of the room. She pulled free. Gideon looked between the documents, Rourke, and me. Then he did what he always did when facts stopped serving him. He changed the subject. This is still my daughter's engagement party, he said. Maris could have waited until tomorrow. She chose to embarrass this family in front of Vaughn's relatives. Dahlia placed the burgundy folder on the cocktail table. It landed with a heavy, quiet sound. Then she opened it. Inside were copies of the Rowan Family Legacy Trust, Amendment 7, the refinancing consent checklist, and the harbor line loan covenants my father had refused to provide until I demanded them. She turned one page toward him. Mr. Rowan, she said, this stopped being a family disagreement the moment you struck a beneficiary whose approval your entire refinancing package requires. Nobody spoke. Not Gideon. Not Nadine. Not Avellini. The words stayed suspended in the room. My father looked down at the page. For the first time that night, I saw something real break through his expression. Not regret. Not concern for me. Fear. His eyes moved over the clause Dahlia had marked. Beneficiary Conduct Certification. Trustee Fiduciary Review. Written consent required before collateralized assets could remain in the refinancing structure. Marius spoke again. The bank requires a current certification that no beneficiary has been coerced, intimidated, or subjected to conduct that could compromise independent consent. Gideon looked up slowly. You are saying she can stop the refinancing? Dahlia closed the folder halfway. I am saying your actions tonight created a material issue that must be documented before any closing can proceed. The rain hammered against the glass walls behind us. Somewhere near the back of the room, a champagne flute touched the table too hard and cracked. My father had not looked worried when I walked in drenched from the rain. He had not looked worried when I said Rourke was lying. He had not looked worried when he hit me. But now he stared at the trust documents like they had become something dangerous. And for the first time in my life, Gideon Rowan looked at me like I was no longer a daughter he could silence. He looked at me like I was the one person in the room who could decide what happened next. Dahlia did not close the trust folder. She turned another page and placed one finger on a paragraph halfway down, where several lines had been marked in blue. The Harbor Line refinancing is $12,800,000, she said. It must close before Monday morning, or Rowan Development Group triggers a covenant breach with the lender. The words landed differently than the accusation against Rourke. That accusation had made the room curious. This made the room careful. A few guests shifted away from the cocktail table. Vaughn's father stopped pretending to study the flower arrangements. Someone near the bar placed a champagne glass down too quickly, and the stem made a sharp sound against the table. Gideon looked at Dahlia without blinking. That is confidential business information. It was confidential, Dahlia said. Until you used trust assets as cross-collateral and requested beneficiary consent without providing a complete disclosure package. Marius opened his document case again. He removed a legal-size page and set it beside the trust amendment. The type was dense, but one line had been printed in bold. Beneficiary conduct certification required prior to closing. He spoke in the same controlled tone he had used all night. The lender requires the beneficiary to certify that the managing trustee has not engaged in coercion, intimidation, misuse of authority, or conduct that could compromise independent consent. Avellini stared at the page. Then she looked at me. This is insane, she said. You are going to destroy the family over one misunderstanding? I looked at her carefully. The ivory silk dress. The diamond on her hand. The gold lettering on the place cards. The flowers that had been flown in that morning because Nadine said local arrangements did not photograph well enough. One misunderstanding. That was what she called our father hitting me twice in front of everyone we knew. I let the silence sit for a moment. Then I asked, do you know what account paid for this night? Her face changed. Not much. But enough. What are you talking about? You know exactly what I am talking about. Nadine stepped in before Avellini could answer. Maris, this is not the time. No, I said. This is exactly the time. Dahlia slid a second sheet from the folder. It was a collateral schedule. A list of properties, trust-backed assets, and guarantees connected to the Harbor Line refinancing. The paper was stiff and bright beneath the chandelier light. Marius pointed to 3 entries. The family trust is securing part of the lender exposure, he said. The beneficiary assets are tied to the Harbor Line project, the new East Bank development, and certain discretionary distributions already made from the trust. I read the line again. Discretionary distributions. The phrase was technical. The meaning was not. Avellini's engagement expenses had not come from my father's personal account. They had come from money connected to the same trust Gideon told me I had no reason to ask about. The Briar Glen deposit. The ring. The floral contract. The tasting menu. The private transportation for Vaughn's relatives. All of it sat somewhere near the edge of assets my signature was now being asked to protect. Vaughn took a step away from Avellini. It was not dramatic. He simply released her arm and moved closer to his parents. But everyone saw it. Avellini, he said, did you know the trust was paying for the engagement expenses? She looked at him. Her mouth opened, then closed. My father was handling it. That is not an answer. He said it was covered. Vaughn's expression tightened. His family had money. That had been obvious from the moment they arrived. But they also had the kind of people around them who understood contracts, disclosures, and reputational risk. He was not looking at the flowers anymore. He was looking at the collateral schedule. Gideon stepped toward me. "Maris," he said. "We need to talk privately." The change in his voice was almost worse than the anger. 30 minutes earlier, he had ordered me out. Now he was asking. I looked at him. "Anything you can say privately," I said, "you can say in front of the people who watched you hit me." His face tightened. "Do not make this harder than it already is." I almost smiled. Not because it was funny. Because that sentence had followed me through my entire life. Do not make it harder. Do not ask why Avellini gets more. Do not ask what the money is for. Do not ask why your name is on a trust you were never told about. Do not ask why your father trusted a liar over you. I looked down at the refinancing consent checklist. Then I looked back at him. "You did not slap a daughter who needed you," I said. "You slapped the person holding the signature you needed most." Nobody interrupted. Even Rourke stayed quiet. His face had gone gray under the conservatory lights. He stood near the bar with his hands at his sides, watching the room separate from him in slow, visible stages. Gideon's voice dropped. "Maris, I was under pressure." "You were under pressure when you decided to spend trust-backed money on this party?" His eyes flicked toward Avellini. "You do not understand the full structure." "Then explain it." "This was supposed to keep the family stable. By keeping me uninformed?" "I was going to tell you." "When?" He did not answer. The rain struck the glass in hard, uneven waves. Marius closed the document case halfway. "The issue is straightforward," he said. "The refinancing cannot close on the current schedule without Ms. Rowan's written certification. Given tonight's documented conduct, that certification requires independent review." Gideon looked at him. "How long?" "That depends on the scope of the fiduciary review." "How long?" he asked again. Dahlia answered this time. "Long enough for the lender to decide whether it still wants to proceed." That was when Gideon's composure finally gave way. Not completely. He was still my father. He had spent decades learning how to hold his face steady in rooms where other people were nervous. But his voice went rough at the edges. "Maris, please. You know what happens if Harbor Line misses closing. The line gets frozen. Vendors panic. Employees get dragged into it." I watched him. For the first time in my life, he was looking at me as if I had power. Not emotional power. Not family power. Real power. The kind written into legal documents. The kind backed by signatures, collateral, covenants, and the possibility of an asset freeze. It was a strange feeling. Not satisfying in the way revenge stories pretend it is. Just clear. My father had never cared whether I felt small. He only cared once he understood I could no longer be ignored. I picked up the trust amendment from the table. The paper was heavier than it looked. "I am not signing anything tonight," I said. "Not until every account is reviewed, every discretionary distribution is disclosed, and every person who used my name as cover is identified." Avellini's eyes filled, but she still did not apologize. Nadine looked at Gideon as if she expected him to fix it. Vaughn stood farther away now, his distance speaking more honestly than any of them had all evening. Gideon lowered his voice again. "Maris, do not do this to me." I held his gaze. "I did not do this to you." Then I placed the trust document back on the table. "You did." My father reached for my arm. Not hard. Not the way he had reached for me earlier. This time, his fingers closed around my sleeve with the careful pressure of someone who had realized there were witnesses. "Maris," Gideon said. "Come with me for 1 minute." I looked at his hand. Then I looked at his face. He let go. We walked toward the private hallway beside the conservatory, past the coat check, past the framed engagement photos, past the window where rain tapped against the glass in steady gray lines. Behind us, the guests had gone quiet in that restrained way people do when they want to hear everything without appearing to listen. Gideon stopped near the end of the hall. The chandelier light from the main room barely reached us there. His suit jacket looked rumpled now. His tie had shifted slightly to the left. He rubbed one hand over his mouth before speaking. "I did not know Rourke was lying," he said. I kept my clutch in both hands. "You did not ask whether he was." He came to me with records. He came to you with a story. He said there were unauthorized accounts. And you believed him before you asked me one question. Gideon looked toward the window. Rainwater slid down the glass in narrow lines, bending the lights from the parking lot into broken shapes. I did not know about Bellridge operations, he said. I did not know there was a pending transfer. You did not know because you did not want to know. His jaw tightened. I thought you were under pressure. I thought the studio was struggling. I thought you were hiding things. I waited. He had spent years teaching me that silence was rude when he wanted an answer. That night, silence was useful. Gideon exhaled slowly. I never thought this would turn into this. I looked at him. This did not turn into anything. You made choices. His eyes moved back to mine. Maris. You chose Rourke's version before you heard mine. You chose to call me a disgrace in front of 60 people. You chose to hit me twice. You chose to use the trust without telling me what you were asking me to protect. His shoulders lowered by a fraction. I was under pressure. I adjusted the broken clasp on my clutch. The metal edge pressed cold against my thumb. You were under pressure when you used trust-backed assets to support Harborline. You were under pressure when you spent money on Avellini's engagement party. You were under pressure when you needed my signature before Monday morning. He looked past me toward the main room. You do not understand what happens if the bank freezes the line. Then explain it. The construction draws stop. Vendors stop work. The East Bank project gets delayed. Harborline could default. We lose the ability to refinance under the current terms. You should have explained that before asking me to sign. I was going to. When? He did not answer. The rain continued against the glass. For years, my father had treated information like property. He gave people only what they needed to stay useful. Avellini received the polished version of every decision. Nadine received enough to defend him. I received nothing until my signature became necessary. Now he stood in a hallway beside his daughter's engagement party, trying to make urgency sound like honesty. I need you to sign before Monday, he said. You do not have to decide everything tonight. Just sign the consent, let the closing move forward, and then we can sort out the rest. I looked at him for a long moment. Sort out the rest? You know what I mean. Yes, I said. I do. He meant, sign now, accept the explanation later, and let the family return to pretending nothing had happened. That had always been the arrangement. I lowered my voice. I will not sign anything until an independent forensic review is complete. His face changed. Maris. I will not sign until every discretionary distribution has been disclosed. I will not sign until the cross-collateral schedule is reviewed. I will not sign until Rourke's access history has been preserved. And I will not sign while you remain managing trustee. For the first time, he looked genuinely unsteady. You want me to step down? Temporarily. You cannot be serious. I am very serious. He looked toward the hall entrance, where Dahlia stood waiting with Marius. Nadine stood behind them, one hand wrapped around the other. Avellini was farther back now. Vaughn had moved closer to his parents. Even from where I stood, I could see that he was no longer beside her. Gideon's voice dropped. If I step down, people will assume I did something wrong. You hit me in front of them. That is not what I mean. I know. He looked at me then, and the anger was gone. What remained was smaller. Maris, he said. Please. I picked up the trust folder Dahlia had handed me earlier and held it against my side. You called me a disgrace. I was angry. You said I was ruining Avellini's night. You were arguing in front of everyone. You were accusing me of stealing. He swallowed. I made a terrible mistake. That was the phrase he chose. A terrible mistake. He called it a mistake because he had finally become the person facing consequences. If I had stayed quiet, he would have called it discipline. If I had signed the consent form anyway, he would have called it family loyalty. I walked back toward the main room. Gideon followed. The guests parted as we returned to the cocktail table. Dahlia stood beside the trust documents with a metal pen in her hand. Marius had opened the refinancing checklist again. Rourke remained near the bar, but now he was staring at the floor. Gideon stopped in front of everyone. His voice was quieter than before. Maris, he said. Please. Do not destroy me over one terrible mistake. No one moved. Avellini's face had gone pale. Nadine closed her eyes briefly. Vaughn did not look at her. I looked at my father. Then I looked at Dahlia. Please prepare a beneficiary refusal notice, I said. Dahlia nodded once. She placed the pen on top of the document. The sound was light, but it carried. Gideon's breath caught. Maris. The refinancing is suspended pending independent review, I said. The trust distributions will be audited. The account access records will be preserved. You will step aside as managing trustee until the review is complete. You cannot do this tonight. I can document it tonight. Marius spoke next. For the record, the bank will require written confirmation of the beneficiary's position before any closing decision is made. Gideon looked at him, then back at me. His voice had almost disappeared. I am your father. I held his gaze. You were my father when you hit me too. The room stayed silent. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. The legal records will decide what happens next, I said. Not your apology. Not Avellini's party. Not my feelings. Then I signed nothing. And for the first time in my life, I let my father stand alone with the consequences he had spent years teaching everyone else to carry. By Monday morning, Rourke no longer had access to Rowan Bell's studio. At 8:06, Dahlia's forensic accountant, Marius Holt, joined me in the conference room through a secure video call. Neria sat beside me with her laptop open. The blinds were half closed, and the office printer kept feeding out preservation notices in slow, steady bursts. At 8:11, Marius disabled Rourke's administrative credentials. At 8:13, he revoked the Bellridge operations profile. At 8:16, he placed a litigation hold on the accounting platform, the company email server, the shared project drive, and every device connected to Rourke's account. The timing mattered. The pending transfer had been scheduled for 8 o'clock. Because Dahlia had contacted the bank Saturday night, the wire never cleared. Instead, it sat in a suspended queue, marked for review. $68,400. That was the number Rourke had expected to disappear before anyone understood what he had done. Marius turned his screen toward us. This is the destination account, he said. Bellridge Operations, LLC. The filing records appeared beside the payment trail. The LLC had been registered 8 months earlier. The listed organizer was not Rourke Bell. It was a woman named Fallon Mercer, his girlfriend. Her apartment address matched the address Rourke had used for a personal credit application 2 years earlier. The connection was not subtle once the documents were placed next to each other. It had only been hidden because nobody had been looking. Neria pressed her lips together. He set this up before he even asked about the access controls. Yes, Marius said. The entity existed first. The access changes came later. That suggests planning rather than an isolated misuse of authorization. I looked at the screen. The timeline was clean. The LLC filing. The user profile creation. The changes to dual authorization. The export activity. The pending wire. Each step had a date. Each date had an IP address. Each IP address had a device record. Rourke had not made one reckless move. He had built a sequence. Then he had gone to my father with a story designed to make the sequence look like mine. Dahlia arrived at the studio around 10 with 2 large envelopes and a stack of printed email records. She placed them on the conference table, then removed her coat without sitting down. We found the communication chain, she said. My stomach tightened. Between Rourke and Gideon? Between Rourke and Avellini first. She slid the first printout toward me. The email header glowed blue from the timestamp line. 3 days before the engagement party, Rourke had written to my sister. He claimed he was concerned about unusual activity at Rowan Bell Studio. He said I had become secretive and defensive whenever anyone asked about the financials. He had not attached documents. He had attached fear. Avellini replied less than 10 minutes later. Dad should know if Maris is doing something that could hurt the family. The next email was worse. Rourke told her that he believed I had moved retainers through accounts he could not see. He said he was afraid clients would blame the Rowan family because of our business name. Then Avellini forwarded the email to Gideon. No questions. No call to me. No request for a ledger or an account report. Just a message to my father saying she thought he needed to handle this before it became public. I read the email twice. Then I set it down. Dahlia watched me carefully. Avellini gave a statement this morning, she said. She says she only passed along the messages because she thought your father should know. She did not think I should know. No, Neria closed her laptop. That is not confusion, she said. That is choosing a side before anyone checks the facts. I nodded once. There was nothing else to say. By noon, Dahlia had filed an emergency civil action against Rourke, Belridge Operations LLC, and Fallon Mercer. The filing sought an asset freeze, preservation of electronic records, an accounting of company funds, and an injunction preventing Rourke from contacting studio clients. A separate criminal referral went to the county fraud unit. Marius called it suspected wire fraud, misuse of authorization, and attempted embezzlement. Dahlia called it civil fraud. I called it exactly what it was. A plan. That afternoon, Rourke came to the studio. He did not get past the front desk. The building manager had already been given his name and photo. His key card had been deactivated. His office had been sealed for evidence preservation. I watched him through the glass front door. He wore the same navy coat he had worn to Avellini's engagement party. His hair was damp from the rain. He looked smaller outside the studio than he ever had inside it. He called me. I let it ring. He called again. I let it ring. At 2:17, he sent a message. This has gotten out of control. We need to talk. At 2:21, he sent another. You do not understand what you are doing to both of us. I showed them to Dahlia. She added them to the evidence file. Neria sat across from me with a legal pad in front of her. I will give a statement, she said. You do not have to. I know. She looked toward the empty office that had once belonged to Rourke. I heard the calls. I saw him asking about access. I saw him checking whether you worked from home on Fridays. I kept thinking there was probably a normal explanation. There usually is, I said. Not this time. She signed the witness declaration before she left that evening. Her statement included the dates of the parking lot calls, the words she heard, the access questions, and the unusual after-hours logins. It was detailed. It was calm. It was enough to matter. When the office finally emptied, I sat alone at my desk with the evidence folder open beside my laptop. The papers smelled like toner and cold coffee. The court envelope on top had sharp corners that pressed into my palm when I picked it up. Rourke had not counted on me having records. He had counted on me having no one. That was the part one understood now. He did not think he could beat me because he was smarter. He thought he could beat me because he knew my family well enough to predict they would isolate me for him. He knew my father would believe a polished accusation. He knew Avellini would forward a message without asking questions. He knew Nadine would call silence, keeping the peace. He thought their loyalty to appearances would do the work his fraud could not. He had almost been right. But he had misunderstood one thing. I had spent years building a life outside the version of me my family preferred. I had employees who noticed details. I had a lawyer who read every line. I had a bank that preserved records. And now I had a file large enough to make his story collapse under its own weight. 2 weeks after the engagement party, Dahlia called the first formal trust meeting. It took place in a private conference room at the law firm downtown, 3 floors above a parking garage and 1 block from the courthouse. The room had a long walnut table, a wall of windows, and no family photographs anywhere. That felt appropriate. Nothing about the meeting was family anymore. Dahlia sat at the head of the table with Marius beside her. A forensic accounting report rested in front of each seat, bound in gray covers with numbered tabs along the side. Gideon sat across from me. Nadine sat beside him, holding a pen she never used. Avellini sat at the far end of the table with her arms folded tightly across her chest. The chair beside her was empty. Vaughn had not come. He had sent a letter through his attorney instead. Dahlia opened the meeting without looking at anyone for long. The purpose of this review is to address the harbor line refinancing, the cross-collateralization of trust assets, the discretionary distributions associated with Avellini Rowan's engagement expenses, and the documented conduct involving Maris Rowan on February 15th. The door closed behind the paralegal. It closed slowly. The sound seemed louder than it should have. Marius opened the first report. Independent review confirmed that trust-backed assets were used to secure portions of the harbor line refinancing structure, he said. The review also confirmed discretionary distributions connected to personal expenses that were not properly disclosed to beneficiary Maris Rowan before consent was requested. He turned a page. The engagement venue deposit, jewelry payment, floral contract, catering advance, transportation deposit, and certain wedding-related vendor commitments were paid through accounts tied to the trust's collateral pool. Avellini's face tightened. It was Dad's money, she said. No, Dahlia said. It was money connected to assets held for the benefit of multiple beneficiaries. That distinction is why we are here. Gideon leaned back in his chair. The room had changed him. At Briar Glen, he had looked like a man trying to keep a party under control. In Dahlia's office, he looked like a man being forced to read the numbers he had kept hidden. This was not intentional misconduct, he said. The distributions were temporary. Harborline was expected to close before any issue arose. Dahlia slid another page toward him. The heading read, Trust Oversight Order and Temporary Suspension Notice. Intent does not erase the disclosure failure, she said. It also does not erase the beneficiary conduct issue created by your assault. Nadine turned toward Gideon. You should say something, she whispered. He did not answer. Marius continued. Effective immediately, Mr. Rowan will be suspended from acting as sole managing trustee pending completion of the fiduciary review. An independent co-trustee will oversee any trust-related transaction, refinancing decision, or asset disposition. The sentence was plain. The effect was not. Gideon's hand tightened around the edge of the report. For years, he had managed the trust like it was another part of Rowan Development Group. He treated its money as an extension of his authority. He treated information as something he could distribute when it benefited him. Now his authority had been reduced to a line in a suspension notice. The refinancing could still move forward, but only under conditions he could not control. Dahlia explained them one by one. Independent oversight, full accounting disclosure, removal of Avellini's personal expenses from the trust-backed collateral structure, written certification that no beneficiary would be pressured, threatened, or coerced into signing any consent document. A forensic review of all cross-collateralized assets. Gideon listened without interrupting. That was new too. Avellini pushed her chair back slightly. So Maris gets what she wanted, she said. I looked at her. No, I said. I get what I was legally entitled to before any of this happened. You were tearing everything apart. You stood there while Dad hit me. Her lips parted. I did not know what to do. You knew enough to stay silent. The room stayed still. Avellini looked down at the report in front of her, but she did not touch it. I had spent most of my life watching her avoid difficult moments by making herself smaller, softer, easier to protect. That day, the same habit had nowhere to go. She had passed Rourke's message to our father. She had repeated his accusation. She had asked me to sign the refinancing documents because it would make things easier. Then she had watched me pick my keys up from the floor. I did not raise my voice. A family is not a place where one person gets hurt so everyone else can keep pretending the table is beautiful. Nadine's eyes filled. She turned toward me after the meeting, while Dahlia and Marius gathered the reports. I am sorry things became so ugly, she said. The wording was careful. It left out names. It left out actions. It left out the fact that she had watched Gideon hit me and said nothing. I picked up my bag. I am not coming back to the house to talk it out. Maris, please. We are still your family. I looked at her. You have been telling me that for years. It only seems to matter when you need me to forgive something. Then I left. That evening, Gideon sent me a long email. It began with an apology. It moved into explanations. Harbor line pressure. Vendor deadlines. The fear of losing control of the company. The stress of trying to make Avellini's engagement perfect. By the end, he wrote that he hoped we could move past this as a family. I read it once. Then I forwarded it to Dahlia. My reply was 4 sentences. All future communication should go through counsel. I will cooperate with the independent trust review. I will not sign any refinancing documents until the review is complete. I will not discuss the events of February 15th outside the legal process. Dahlia sent it for me. After that, I took Brackett for a walk. The rain had stopped sometime in the afternoon. The sidewalks in Shaker Heights were still wet, but the air had cleared. Early spring had started pushing through the bare trees, and the neighborhood smelled like damp soil and cold pavement. Brackett pulled lightly on the leash whenever he caught a new scent. I let him. For once, I did not feel the need to explain where I had been, why I was late, why I asked questions, or why I could not keep pretending everything was fine. I had not lost my family that night. I had only stopped calling a system of silence by that name. 6 months after the night at Briar Glen Conservatory, the new sign went up on the glass doors of our office. Rowan Studio Collective. Neria stood beside me with a level in one hand and a box of metal letters at her feet. "You know the last one is crooked," she said. "It is not crooked. It is absolutely crooked." I stepped back, studied the letters through the afternoon light, then sighed. "Fine. Move the C 2 millimeters left." She smiled and adjusted it. The office was still in Cleveland, but we had moved 3 blocks from the old warehouse. The new space had wider windows, better insulation, and enough room for the team to work without hearing every client call from the next desk. The walls were still mostly bare. The conference room still needed shelves. The break area had a coffee machine that complained every morning. But the studio felt different. It belonged to us now. Rourke's name had been removed from the state registration, the lease, the client contracts, and every invoice template. His equity interest had been transferred through the civil settlement, along with a restitution agreement that brought the total recovery to just under $98,000. The money returned slowly. The legal consequences did not. Rourke was still facing criminal charges related to attempted embezzlement, misuse of authorization, and falsified access records. His attorney had tried to describe Bellridge operations as a bookkeeping misunderstanding. The timestamps, the Shell LLC, the email trail, and the pending wire transfer made that argument difficult to sustain. I did not follow every hearing. I did not need to. Dahlia sent me the filings that mattered. Everything else stayed in a folder marked Rourke Bell, civil and criminal matter, where it belonged. Neria placed the final letter against the glass. "There," she said. "Now it looks right." I looked at the new name. Rowan Studio Collective. Not because I wanted to erase the past. Because I wanted the future to be accurate. Neria had become associate principal 2 months earlier. She had earned it long before the title appeared on her business cards. She had managed staff, caught inconsistencies, protected client relationships, and signed a witness declaration when it would have been easier to stay quiet. We had hired 1 junior architect and 1 permitting coordinator since then. Our project pipeline was smaller than it had been before everything collapsed, but it was cleaner. No hidden access accounts. No vague reimbursement forms. No partner who treated trust like a weakness. That afternoon, Neria handed me a slim envelope. "Dahlia sent this over by courier," she said. She said it was the final trust update. I opened it at my desk. Inside was a certified copy of the amended Rowan Family Legacy Trust, along with the independent oversight order and the final refinancing restructuring summary. Gideon had kept an operating role at Rowan Development Group. He still attended project meetings. He still knew every contractor by first name. He still understood construction schedules better than most people in the company. But he no longer controlled the trust alone. Every trust-backed transaction required co-trustee review. Every discretionary distribution had to be documented. Every refinancing decision needed independent certification and beneficiary disclosure. The system had not destroyed him. It had simply stopped allowing him to act without witnesses. Dahlia came by late that afternoon. She stood near my desk while the sun turned the windows orange. Your mother built more protection into that trust than Gideon ever admitted, she said. I looked down at the papers. I keep wondering whether she knew this would happen. She may not have known the details, Dahlia said. But she knew your father believed control and care were the same thing. I looked up. Dahlia's voice softened, though she never lost its precision. She did not leave those protections so you could punish anyone, Maris. She left them so you would never have to live without a voice. For a moment, I could hear only the muted sounds of the office around us. A printer running. Neria speaking to a client in the next room. Someone opening the refrigerator in the break area. I touched the embossed seal on the trust copy. It no longer felt cold. Avellini and Vaughn never set a new wedding date. At first, people said the delay was temporary. Then they said the plans had changed. By the end of summer, nobody said much at all. Vaughn's family had pulled back after the trust review exposed where the engagement expenses came from. Without the flowers, the venue deposits, the transportation arrangements, and the polished story surrounding them, Avellini and Vaughn had very little left to protect. I did not take pleasure in that. I had loved my sister once. Maybe part of me still did. But love could not survive where silence was treated as proof of loyalty. That evening, I went home to my condo in Shaker Heights. Brackett met me at the door with his tennis ball in his mouth and his crooked tail moving so hard it tapped against the wall. He followed me into the kitchen, then onto the balcony after I changed into a sweater. Cleveland spread out beneath us in the distance, its lights beginning to rise as the sky darkened from orange to blue. Brackett settled against my ankle, warm and heavy. I looked out over the city and thought about Briarglen. The rain on the glass. The string quartet stopping mid-song. My clutch breaking open on the marble floor. My father's hand across my face. For months, I had expected those memories to keep their weight. Instead, they had changed shape. They were no longer proof that I had been made small. They were proof that I had finally seen the truth. There are doors that do not need to be slammed. You only have to walk through them and refuse to return. My father sent one more letter after the trust restructuring was finalized. It was shorter than the first. He wrote that he hoped I understood he had never wanted to hurt me. I did not answer. Not because I wanted revenge. Not because I needed him to suffer. I simply no longer needed to explain why consequences belonged to the person who created them. Brackett rested his head against my foot. The city lights flickered below us. And for the first time in a long time, the quiet did not feel like something I had been forced to accept. It felt like mine. I did not destroy my father. I stopped standing between him and the consequences he had earned.